So to make sure that we get everybody out on time, we'll start the webinar and we'll open with the acknowledgement to country. So as we gather virtually from many different places across Australia today, I'd like to take a moment to acknowledge the traditional custodians of all the lands on which we're each located. For me, here in Brisbane, I acknowledge the Turrbal and Jagera people, paying my respects to their elders past, present and emerging. I recognise their ongoing connection to this country. Let's all take a moment to recognise and pay respect to the rich and diverse cultures, histories and ongoing connections to country of all Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander peoples across Australia. So good afternoon, everybody, and welcome to today's webinar. I'm Jean Stewart, lead for Next Gen Project Professionals, and for my day job, I'm Program Manager at Orica, and I'll be your facilitator for today's webinar. We're really excited to have you join us today for what promises to be a really insightful session, from boomers to zoomers, turning generational tension into team strength. To get us started today, I want to set the stage for why this discussion is so important. In today's rapidly evolving work landscape, understanding the dynamics between different generations is more critical than ever. This session today will explore how generational diversity impacts project teams, and we'll discuss strategies to transform potential challenges into opportunities for stronger collaboration, leadership, and engagement, which ultimately drives project success and organisational growth. To make sure that you get the most out of this session, you'll have access to the Q&A throughout the presentation, so please feel free to post your questions as they arise. However, we'll review the Q&A at the end of the last 10 minutes of the presentation, and we'll ask Jo to directly answer those questions for you. So without any further delay, it's my pleasure to introduce our keynote speaker today, a leading expert in intergenerational dynamics who helps leaders address generational challenges to build mission-driven teams. Dr. Jo Azzopardi is a consultant, researcher and speaker with over 24 years of experience spanning education, leadership and community engagement. Originally from Canada, Jo has lived and worked in 4 countries and now calls Australia home. This global experience has shaped his understanding of how different generations interact, lead, and contribute to various cultural contexts. Jo's work is grounded in both lived experience and academic rigour. Through his PhD research, he created the world's first intergenerational assessment tool, a framework designed to help organisations understand and improve how generations relate and work together. It is a practical tool that turns complex relational dynamics into clear, actionable insights. Throughout his career, Jo has worked with schools, corporate teams, and not-for-profit organisations to improve collaboration, staff retention, and team culture. His approach helps teams move beyond stereotypes and frustration to deeper trust, clarity, and purpose. Today, Jo will be sharing insights into how generational disconnection becomes a hidden barrier to productivity and what it looks like when teams get it right. His message is honest, research-informed, and incredibly timely for leaders navigating workforce change and retention challenges. You're absolutely in for a thought-provoking and practical session. So over to you, Jo.
Thanks so much, Jean, and thanks for the opportunity. Great to have all of you here. It's very exciting that so many people are interested in this very important topic. I'll just start out with a story. A few years ago, I was leading a team when we discovered that a former finance manager had been making financial decisions outside of the proper protocols. Now, nothing illegal happened, but he had bypassed the team and the process dictated by policies. Now, as you can imagine, that didn't sit well with people. The older staff, they were frustrated with the lack of process. That's true. But they knew this man. He'd been loyal for years. He had had their backs, and they believed that he deserved grace, particularly because of how long he had been in the company. However, the younger staff felt differently. For them, it wasn't about the man, it was about the system that was in place. And they thought, well, if the policies weren't followed, how could they trust the system? How could they trust the process? This wasn't just a disagreement about one decision. It was actually a deeper generational challenge that was taking place. One group prioritized loyalty and history, while the other prioritized fairness and accountability. Both believed in the importance of trust, but they each had a different perspective. For one group, it was about trust in an individual, and for the other, it was trust in the system. And the vote was close, but the older majority chose leniency. And the result, the younger team disengaged, some left altogether. Leadership's decision to protect the past sent a message to the younger leaders: your expectations don't matter. And the cost? Turnover, disengagement, loss of future leadership. And this wasn't just their story. Stories like these are happening in workplaces and teams everywhere. Now, I shared a story with you that may cause some people to think, well, he's saying that the older generation thinks it's okay to do these things. But here is what I would like you to consider. With scenarios like this, the generational players can change. In some stories, it's the reverse. In this particular story, that's how it played out. I'd like to say we wouldn't be here where we are today without the work and sweat of those who came before us. In fact, one of the greatest strengths of senior team members is their experience, their commitment, their ability to weather challenges over time. They often bring stability, wisdom, and long-term vision, things every organization needs. And here's the thing, it's not about older generations not caring about accountability. They actually do care a lot. In this scenario, the real challenge, it's not that different generations don't agree on what's important or that they have different values to each other. It's this: they usually disagree on which values should take priority in the moment. Most of the time, we're not arguing about right or wrong. Most of the time, we're arguing about which value matters most right now. And that's where the generational tension comes from. We argue about which great thing is the best great thing. And this isn't just their story. It's happening, as I mentioned, probably it's on your project teams, I would guess. Now, just a reflection exercise, and this is probably the reason why you're here. I imagine that most work with people in a different generation. And if you've ever felt frustrated by those generational differences, you're like me. I've had 3 other careers in my time before this one, and I have worked with a different generation in each one. And some of the generations I've worked with are no longer in the workforce. They are our oldest members of society. And like you, there were frustrations in my careers. There were laughs as well, and tears, and a whole lot of different emotions. So I'm pretty certain that experiencing generational diversity and tension, it's not just my experience, but the fact that you're here tells me that it's yours as well. Most teams face this challenge. Now, generational tension isn't always obvious. In the example I gave you, it was so obvious you could almost cut it with a knife. But sometimes it's hiding in plain sight in the smallest workplace discussions, and sometimes it's in the pettiest, The most insignificant discussions is where you'll see it. Let me demonstrate what I mean. I'd like you to imagine that you're in a boardroom. You're in a meeting with all the various decision makers in your team or in your company, and someone suggests updating the office furniture. Talk about opening a can of worms, particularly with some personalities, I'm sure. Now, I could imagine someone, probably the oldest member of the board, saying, "There's nothing wrong with the current chairs or desks. Do you know how much thought went into designing this office and the time it took someone to make these handcrafted pieces?" Meanwhile, a younger baby boomer might reply, "But the chairs are hurting my back and they don't look as good as they used to. We should invest in getting a modern setup that looks good and is more ergonomic." Now, to this, a millennial may chip in and say, "Well, if we're thinking of comfort, why not create some casual collaboration spaces with lounges and standing desks?" And rolling their eyes in true Gen X fashion, a Gen Xer might reply to all of this, "Well, just get some comfortable chairs on sale at Office Works, or better yet, maybe some really nice secondhand ones at auction. Then we'd be comfortable and we wouldn't be spending tons of money on things that don't matter so much as this." Meanwhile, a Gen Z, if they're in the room, not wanting to get involved, they might just text the board chair, "Can we just move on to the next item on the agenda?" Now, in this scenario, it may seem as though each generation has different values, but are they really different values or just different priorities? I would say that each generation in this scenario, if you were to ask them about it, each would agree that comfort is important. They would probably each agree that the workspace environment matters, that cost is a factor, that respecting past investments is valuable. And they probably would all agree that office furniture isn't the most important factor in company success. And this pattern plays out across organizations every day, whether it's leadership decisions, workplace culture, or company-wide strategy. If we don't recognize that each generation brings different value priorities, we risk seeing differences as problems rather than the very perspectives that help us see more clearly. When there's an accident that takes place on the road, the police are hoping several people have different perspectives so that they can make the right choice. And the same is in the work environment. We actually want different perspectives so that we can build a better solution, incorporating all of them. But when we don't do that, when that happens, it could look like one generation might think that their ideas are always being shot down. Or maybe one might feel like they're being dismissed as controlling or outdated. Someone could be seen as lazy when in reality they're just being efficient, or too sensitive when actually they're just being considerate. And these misunderstandings don't just lead to frustration, they lead to dissatisfaction, mistrust, and ultimately people leaving. And I think we all know that losing great people has a high cost to productivity, to budgets, and let's be honest, to everyone's mental health. Now, in that moment, let's take time to reflect on how much this is actually costing business according to the numbers. Have you ever considered what avoiding talking about generational tension might be costing your teams? Let's take a moment to look at the research because the data is pretty clear on it. Let's start with what you might not see on the surface: disengagement. When staff don't feel heard, valued, or understood across generations, they don't always speak up, they often check out. And right now, this is most visible in our youngest workers. And Allianz found that 28% of Gen Z employees in Australia feel highly engaged at work, the lowest engagement of any generation. And that's 2024 data. So that's just last year. Now, this aligns with my own research where I found that intergenerational engagement in communities directly contributes to social and psychological well-being. When younger generations feel disconnected, their sense of purpose and belonging drops, which leads to disengagement in the workplace. And when people disengage long enough, they leave. Gallup 2023 found that workplace friction between generation leads to disengagement, burnout, and higher attrition rates, costing businesses significantly in rehiring and lost productivity. That's probably why many of you are here, because it actually costs quite a bit of money. It's not just frustrating to lose people, it's expensive to lose people. And what that actually means, what they found, Deloitte found that replacing an employee costs up to 1.5 times their salary, making generational turnover a massive financial risk. Now, the research also highlights that for younger employees, it's particularly clear. If they don't see purpose, respect, and development, they move on. And the hiring cycle repeats: recruit, onboard, train, lose. Let's think of an example of this. Let's say you hire someone at the start of a 5-year project and you hire someone for a role that's $100,000 a year. Okay. If the person in that position leaves every 2 years, that's 2 replacement cycles. Now, each cycle, according to Deloitte, is 1.5 times an annual salary. So that's 150,000 times 2. That over 5 years ends up being $450,000 in hidden costs on top of the salary that you're paying for having someone in that role. So instead of seeing $500,000 spent on employee salary for the project for one individual, you're potentially paying $950,000, almost $1 million, simply because of turnover costs. Imagine doing that for several staff members, for several team members. Generational tension costs a lot of money just in the hiring cycle. And these days, it's often the youngest employees who are leaving. Older employees, we are finding that they are leaving sometimes because they don't know how to cope with their younger colleagues. They don't, and the newer process, sometimes that causes them to leave. So we've seen the cost of when people don't stay, almost double what you'd expect to spend if it happened in the way that I showed you. But if we want to fix that, we need to start with a mindset shift regarding the younger generations. Because here's the thing, and I'm speaking particularly to my generation and the older generations. I'm Gen X, but we often talk about Gen Z, Gen Z, and millennials like they're just entering the workforce. But the truth, many of them are not that young anymore. Just as a reality check, in the next 3 to 5 years, Generation Alpha will be coming into your teams. Sorry. So we're going to end up seeing another disruption. And whoever the youngest generation is, they're usually the one that everyone gets upset with, and all the media jumps on that. I mean, every generation who's currently working, we all remember when we were the youngest generation, all the flack we got. We were all called lazy. They're coming in just a few years' time. So that says that Gen Z, particularly the older ones, they're not really that young anymore. The oldest Gen Z members are turning 30 years old this year. 30 is not that young. The oldest millennials, they're turning 45 this year. Millennials are now becoming senior professionals, managers, executives. And I could imagine if we had a bit more interaction in this Zoom, I'd ask the question, well, who here is a millennial? If you're a millennial, you're born between 1980 and 1995. And I want to acknowledge, we're really glad that you're here in this session. Or Gen Zs, if there's any of you, welcome. Gen X, my generation, born between 1965 and 1979. Very happy that I'm on the younger end of that. Want to acknowledge you being here. And let's not forget our baby boomers, born between 1945 and 1964. Now, speaking of people who are halfway through their careers, which unfortunately that would be me, the fact and also the fact that the younger generations one day will be the older generations, millennials and Gen Zs, you're not that far off where we all are at the moment. Where the cost becomes long term is the leadership vacuum. It's not just about frustration, it's not just about cost, it's about who's going to lead next. APS informs us that 47% of Australian workers are aged 45 years or older, making generational collaboration essential. And the Treasury Office reports that by 2054, nearly 25% of Australians will be 65 years or older. And that's going to strain the workforce participation and leadership succession. Now, my research highlights the importance of intentional intergenerational succession planning. Organizations that are proactively engaging younger employees in leadership conversations, they see smoother transitions and stronger long-term stability when they do it early. Now, thinking of myself, I imagine most people here, when you retire, you want to know that all the work you had done is going to be in good hands. I'm hoping by the time I retire, I can trust that the finances will be there, that there will be things in place so I can retire and I don't have to worry about things. For the sake of our own future retirement plans and knowing that we and the world in general will be left in good hands, we need to make sure that they are mentored well. This is costing all of us. And what I discovered is that we can together, with the research and the tools that I've developed, we can stem the flow. We can lower things if we can reduce the amount of generational tension that takes place. Now, while you're thinking about that, let's shift gears into the next section and move the conversation into something more positive. Let's look at the strategies for building collaborative teams. We've talked about what happens when generational tension is ignored. But what can we do to remedy these problems? I'd like to share with you an experience I had from working with a community organization. And when I first spoke with the leaders of this organization, what I discovered was they believed that their biggest generational challenge was their youngest members, the Gen Zs, the Gen Zs. They believed that they weren't engaging enough, and the leaders, they weren't just worried about the productivity side of things, they were actually worried about their well-being, which was fantastic for them to be looking into this. So we decided to run an assessment. We wanted to test the assumption. I challenged them on this, and I always encourage workplaces to do an assessment. And the assessment is a survey, usually takes about 15 minutes to do, where not just the leadership team, but everyone has a chance to share their experience. Now, the question, if you remember, was, were the younger members really the most disconnected? What came up on the result? No. What we found in this particular community, and that's why the assessments are important, because every workplace is different. In this organization, the most disengaged group was actually Gen X. And it was actually a very large section of their team. And so we sat down with a group of them to understand why this was the case. Now, the first step in trying to understand, whenever there's a generation who gets lower scores in a specific area, the first step that I encourage workplaces to do is to create a focus group that's made up of 6 people, no more. And part of the reason why it's such a small group, if there's too many, we don't hear from everyone in the group. If there's too many, also you can start to get a bit of a mob mentality. If they're not happy, it's not very productive. And so we try to keep it small. We try to keep it representative. And someone like myself will go into it, someone who does not work there, so that it is unbiased. And the first session is finding out first, do they agree with the scores? And we show them the scores and we ask the question, do you think this is accurate for your generational group to have scored this? And with this particular group that I was working with, they sadly nodded and said, yeah, the scores are pretty bad, but yeah, that's where it's at. That's probably very accurate for our colleagues. Then the rest of the session, we talk about why, because it's not just finding out what the scores are. That's not the end game. What we want to know is why. Why are we getting those scores? And so we spent the session talking about what has taken place for this generation to be giving these scores on low empowerment and low connection and all these other aspects that are very important when it comes to the dynamics. In the second session we tend to have 2 sessions. The second session is looking at, pardon me, is finding out what we can do to remedy the issues. Okay, not just why, but what can we do from here? What can the workplace do to improve the satisfaction? And also, I asked the question, what can you and those who are of your generation, what can you do to improve? Because relationships are a two-way street, right? I would think everyone here would agree that it's not just those at the top who are causing the issues. It's something that we need everyone to take ownership of. And here's what we found when we sat down with them. Quite a few of the crew in this organization, those who were in the representative group, and they were also speaking about things that had taken place for other people in their group. Quite a few of them had experienced very poor experiences regarding leadership early in their careers. So even though now they were in their 40s and 50s, things that had happened in the past were still coming into their mind. And as most of you know, the things that happen to us early in life have a tendency to influence us well and beyond that time, even if things improve significantly. When they were just starting out, many of them had been overlooked, dismissed, or pushed aside by those who were much older and who were in charge. And without realizing it, their past had influenced a mindset where even though things weren't great when it came to the culture, and things could definitely improve as a whole for the culture, part of the mindset that they had was because of what had taken place when they were younger. And so much so that they were hesitant to actually take leadership roles in this organization. And when you're in your 40s and 50s, you're expecting those in that age group to be taking on roles. So once we understood that, we worked with the leadership team to create intentional conversations that help bridge the gap between them. And we worked with leadership in analyzing what the focus group said, creating a plan from that, and then implementing it. And we did this knowing that this plan that we put together was not just something that those at the top had come up with, or those in HR had come up with, but it was something that had the backing of those who are actually on the front lines. And so because of this, we were able together to rally the Gen Xers into working with leadership to implement some of the changes, and they helped with bringing it into action. And interestingly enough, and very excitingly, within a year, this generational group who once felt disconnected, they became some of the most engaged and active people in the organization. Several of them started stepping into leadership opportunities. Because the reality is, when people feel seen, heard, and valued, they show up to work differently. Now, I'd like you to imagine with me how much time, how much effort, how many resources would have been wasted if they had simply gone with their initial gut feeling that Gen Z were the ones who needed the most help. The reality is, Gen Z did need some help, but some of the reasons they were feeling that was because the older Gen Xers, the attitudes that they had had was influencing them, and it was influencing all these other aspects. We need to make sure that when we come up with solutions, we're not just coming up solutions for the symptoms, but we're actually finding out what are the deeper issues that's taking place in an organization. And just like my first story, it's important for you to understand that in every organization, it's different. Sometimes it is the oldest. Sometimes it's those in the middle, like this current story. Sometimes it's those who are the youngest. The assessments are important so we actually know what is the actual issue that we're dealing with. We want to get to the root cause, just like when we go to a mechanic or if we go to a doctor and we say, oh, my finger hurts, I put bandages on it. The doctor might say, the bandages aren't going to do anything. You've got nerve damage in your elbow. Assessments are really important in making decisions. How much money could have been spent on the younger members of their organization when they weren't even the ones who needed the most support? And this is exactly what happens in workplaces as well. Assumptions about different generations lead to wasted time, disengagement, and poor decision making. But when we take the time to truly understand the people we work with, we create solutions that actually work. So, let's talk about some strategies that you can take away with, particularly regarding, I'm going to speak regarding the younger generations, as most of the time, that is what most people are concerned about when they talk to me. They're concerned with it's really difficult to retain the younger generations in our team. So I am going to focus on them, but this does apply to other generations. But the focus is on where it tends to hurt in most organizations. Now, let me first start by saying these are generalized strategies. I say that because I actually prefer to first do an assessment to get a diagnostic with a workplace so that we can find out how each generation is actually traveling in their own right and with other generations. And when a workplace does an assessment, they end up getting an interactive report. Here's some snapshots of what one looks like. If I actually know the scores of your workplace, I would focus specifically to what you need. But as there are, it looks like there's 150 odd people in this session, and I've been told there might be that many more who are wanting to watch the recording. I'm going to talk about generalized advice that should work regardless of your situation. So here's the first strategy I would like to talk to you about. Be transparent about the pathway. And the key message is set clear expectations and they will rise to it. Now, thinking back to when I was young, when a lot of particularly the Gen Xers and baby boomers were young, when we were in school and we had an assessment to do or homework to do, and we asked the teacher, what about this? What does this mean? How do you do this? A lot of time they would say, go and open a dictionary or go and check out the encyclopedia. And we would be like, oh, I don't want to do that. Just tell me what the answer is. Just do that. We don't want to look it up. Time is not like that anymore. Those days are gone. Why? Because it's really easy to find the answer to things. You can just Google it. You can use AI now to find the answers to things. And the younger generations, they want to know the answer and they want to know the context to the answer as well. Things have changed for them. Um, when they want to know something, particularly if it's in regard to their life, they expect to have an answer for it. Think about it from their perspective. If there was someone you knew who had information about your life and they weren't willing to share it with you, you'd be pretty upset. When they ask questions about their career pathway, they want to know what the answer is. They, if we don't have some answers for them, um, they will think, well, why are they trying to hide this from me? They will think it. They will either think that we are inept, we don't know the answers, and we're running a team, which isn't very good, or they will think that we're trying to hide it from them. That is where they will see it. But if during the onboarding process, when you are hiring someone, if you actually tell them you need this many KPIs for the next 6 months, and if you hit all of them, you will get a pay increase. For you to get a promotion, you have to be here for this long. We need to see these things, and then we would consider. Tell them that at the start, because if we make um, for those who are older, we may sort of think, well, when I was young, I would just do my job, I would just work hard, and sometimes I would get a pleasant surprise, and they'd come up to me and tell me that they're giving me a raise. Why can't they just do that? Because the world has changed. We should be able to tell them this is how the career pathway works in your role. We would want to know that. I know as someone who's getting close to 50, when I'm working in a position, I want to know, well, what are the steps for my experience? Tell them this up front. They get anxious when they feel like someone is trying to hide something, and sometimes, and I know it, people don't do it on purpose, but if we have it right there at the start, give them a PDF manual, or better yet, have it so it's a place on your website where they can actually look up those answers. They won't bother you if they can find the answers. They won't bother you with those details. um, Obviously, you can only tell them things that you're allowed to tell them. If they are in line for getting a promotion or a pay rise, and there's some KPI they're not meeting, or there's something that they're not doing, tell them what they're doing wrong. Don't just say, we pick so and so, maybe next time. Tell them specifically what they can do so they have a better chance to get that next time. They love information, they want to know the reasons why. And if you tell them those reasons, they will feel empowered and they will feel like they have some control of their own career. So that is the first strategy. Um, Second one, connect the work to a shared purpose. Uh, Key message: purpose builds bridges between generations. If they feel like you're all working towards a shared goal, psychology tells us people are more likely to get along with each other. They're more likely to put aside their differences if they feel like they need to work together to accomplish something. Gen Z and increasingly the other generations, though, I mean, this applies to the older generations as well, but particularly for the younger ones, they, as I mentioned in the last strategy, they want to know the why behind the what. They're not questioning your authority if they say, why do I have to do this? They're seeking relevance. Nobody wants to feel like they are just a cog in a machine doing something that doesn't mean anything. None of us want that. They, in particular, don't want that. They would rather get paid less money, but be somewhere where they feel like they're making a difference. So if you can help them like connect with them daily and help them to understand why they have to do what they're doing, it may not be as obvious as you think. If you've been in the business for 20 years and they've only been in it for a year or two, they don't have your experience. Let them know your role is really, really important because this is what it does. If they know that what they're doing is important, they're far more likely to follow through with it. They're not questioning your authority. This can be done quickly. You could be saying, well, this report needs to be filled out because it helps the exec team make better resourcing decisions. It could be as simple as that. If it's something that has to be done, nobody likes it, but it has to be done because of OH&S or because of policy, you can be honest with them. You can say, hey, I know it's a pain, but we actually have to legally do this. If we don't do this step, then we can actually get sued that these things happen. They will get that. They will and they will appreciate how honest you are with them. Um, Let them know that what they're doing, there is an important aspect to it because there is, you know why you've hired them. You've hired them because they have to fulfill something that helps you complete the project. So tell them that. Help them to understand that the project will not be able to function well unless you have their help in that role. It creates motivation, it creates ownership. um, if people feel like they're useful, like what they're doing actually matters, they're going to put far more effort into it. And this will also help create cross generational buy in because every generation has this mindset. Um, if everyone understands that we work better if we all get our roles done and if all the roles work in sync, the job is going to get done better. If we just bring these things to light, it will help immensely. Last strategy, and this one is one I know that this one is a topic that comes up fairly often. Pardon me, particularly with the youngest generation. It actually took place, I would say, with everyone when they were younger. Um, and that is respect their efficiency instinct. They are not lazy, they're allergic to pointless process. Who here loves red tape, loves having to jump through all these hoops? I don't think there'd be anyone here who just loves having to fill out several reports that basically say the same thing. We do those things because we have to. They, Gen Z tends to question, pardon me, traditions and processes that feel outdated. Let's be honest. The millennials did this, so did Gen X. We all did this, but they have less tolerance to it. They have been through COVID. They have seen everything get taken down to a bare minimum, and they've seen that, wow, we can actually do things very differently if we go bare minimum. They've seen that um, we can actually manage by stripping things down if we need to. If people, and those of you who have an engineering background, you probably would appreciate this more than others. In engineering, you're wanting things to be very, very efficient. The more efficient it is, the better. Um, Cutting out unnecessary steps is not laziness, it's productivity from their perspective. Uh, we need to invite them into conversations about efficiency and get their opinions. Well, if you think this step isn't important, what would you recommend instead? They might be really far off, but ask the question. Maybe they do have something that could be better. Um, One of the things in particular that tends to irk the oldest generations is that the younger generations, they're far more likely to want to have a meeting via Zoom or Teams. And some people, they get upset with that and they think of it as laziness, but think of it in this is the perspective that they see it. If they have to travel 1 hour from where they are to go to a meeting that lasts an hour, they're thinking, so I have to travel. I have to spend twice as much travel time than I do actually doing my job. That's how they see it. Should they just do everything on Zoom and Teams? Absolutely not. There's really good things about doing things face to face, but they're not not taking that stance because they're lazy. They're taking it because they don't want to waste their time. They want to get their job done as well as and efficient as possible so they can move on with the next thing. Think about it from a team leader perspective. If there's a job that typically takes 6 hours to do, but someone has found a way to do that job in 3 hours, and the job they do, it's either on the same par as a 6 hour job, but or better, wouldn't you want to encourage that? That will save you so much time. You can move on with other projects. You can get all these things done. It's particularly helpful for those who are actually paying the money. This generation, they love trying to find what is the most efficient way of doing things. When we see that as a laziness thing, it's not, no one wants to be called lazy. It's actually something that they have that's like a superpower. And I'm not saying that we should just um, say yes to all the things they're cutting out, because there's some things where it's like, no, 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 we can't cut out that step. I don't like the step either, but policy says that we have to follow it, or else we're going to be breaking all these violations. Tell them that. Just say, hey, this is something where if we don't follow this, we will get in trouble from the city because it'll break one of their rules. Let them know about those things, but hear them out. They may have something that could save your team a lot of time and money. So have a think about it. It also encourages a posture of empowerment when they feel as though you're actually hearing what their ideas are. So just to wrap things up, I'm looking at the time. We've seen the reality. Generational tension is causing frustration, disengagement, and increased turnover. And we know the cost: lost productivity, lost talent, lost trust. The good news: you don't have to figure this out alone. This is what I help leaders do. I help assess the challenges, strategize solutions, and implement lasting change together. I develop a tailored strategy and hands-on support to help your team succeed across generations. Could addressing generational challenges unlock new opportunities for your team? If you're ready to take the next step, let's talk. On the screen, there's a QR code, which if you use it, it will dump my details onto your contact list. If you hit the save button, that is. That's where you can reach me. I'm best reached. Either send me a text. I'd say phone, but with phones, if I don't know the number, I want to make sure it's not a telemarketer. You know how it is. Send me a text, send me an email. I'm also on LinkedIn. LinkedIn is a great way to connect as well. Um, Thank you so much for your time.
Amazing, Joe. Thank you so much for taking us through your presentation. So
That's
we
all right.
might throw to something I prepared earlier while our audience gets warmed up with their questions. So you highlighted the importance of understanding generational priorities rather than just assuming different values. Could you elaborate, Joe, on how project managers can effectively identify these differing priorities within their project teams and how this understanding can be used to tailor project management approaches for better results?
Sure. Um, so how project managers can effectively identify the different priorities is when you have meetings. I have found that most people, when they complain or criticize, it's usually the same topics. If you can see what the theme is whenever certain people mention things, and you really think about what that theme is, you can usually figure out what this person is really valuing and what this person would like to see more. So if suddenly there is if you have to change the timeline and you need to say we need to bump this up so it gets completed in 2 days instead of 4 days, no one's going to be too happy about that. But there might be some people who every time will get really upset about it. They may have the value priority. They're just wanting to make sure the job is done really well. They don't want to have a poor product at the end of the day. So when we have the meetings and when we bring things up, if you listen to what people are saying when they are making comments, their comments will often, over time, they will be the same kind of comments. And from those comments, you can get an idea as to what that person, sometimes it's a specific generation who has certain comments, their priorities tend to be. And as I mentioned, we actually want different perspectives. We're actually stronger get if we get different perspectives as to what could improve. It's not something that's going against you. It's something that could, if we see it as a way of something that could strengthen what we're doing, I think you'd end up getting better results. I hope that answers the question, Jean.
Thanks, Joe. So questions are starting to filter in at the moment. So we've got one, Joe, from Ashwin Murthy. Joe, would it be better to treat the behavior as personality instead of generational gaps?
Right. Very good question. Sometimes when you hear different experts like myself, you get the feeling that everyone's touting a different thing, and that thing is the most important. Um, it's really important to understand, first of all, a generation is actually a subculture. And that has to do with personality in a moment. So just bear with me. But a generation is not just when someone's born, but it's what culture they grew up in. And culture has to do with the greater Australian culture. It has to do with the culture of the city that they're in, of the school that they're in, of their family, of their ethnic background. There's all those things that determine who a person is, and personality is in there as well. Yes, there is definitely there is aspects to behavior where it has to do with the person's personality and their experiences. But if you do have people that are all of the same generation and they're all saying similar things, it's probably not a personality thing. There will be times where it is just the one person. Sometimes we always have that one person on our teams. It is just the one person, and it is a personality thing. But if it tends to be everyone that is from that generation or from that ethnic group, it's probably more than just personality. And I guess that's where it is helpful. The assessment I mentioned, uh, sometimes clients like it because sometimes you have some very loud personalities on your teams, and that personality might be saying that this is a generational issue. When you do the assessment, everybody has the same weight, and it could turn out that, yeah, that one person who is really loud, who is saying that, compared to everyone else isn't agreeing with them. So, yeah, behavior sometimes is a personality thing. It just depends on if it's something that is overlapping more than one person's personality, then we might need to look into it to see if it's a greater thing that has to do with a generation.
Thank you, Joe. So we've got another one from Margaret Dos Santos. Joe, would there be massive differences within generational groups at the outer limits of the groups, i.e., younger and older within the group?
Right. Very good question. Yeah, this is very, particularly with the older generations, like you might notice that baby boomers and those above them, the traditional generations, there was a much greater amount of time that determined their generation, whereas millennials and Gen Alpha, it's like 15 years. With my generation, it's 20 years. Particularly the generations who are older, where their generation spans 20 years or more, there is a bit of a difference between the top and bottom end when it comes to their ages. There is overlap. Like, for example, there's the term Zennials, where it's somebody who fits between a Gen X and a millennial, because when I give you the timelines, every theorist has a slightly different angle for the timeline. So the actual limits for the timelines can be different. I'm a Zennial, if you go by that model. There is some overlap where you have some people where they do share a bit with the younger of the older generation, do share some characteristics with the oldest of the younger generation below them. So I wouldn't say there would be massive differences because it is a line that is determined by theorists that go by events. So just because someone was born in 1980 and someone else was born in 1979, they're pretty much the same generation. We just have to draw a line somewhere. I hope that makes sense. It tends to be more of a gradient. So there will be some aspects that they will actually have more in common with than their own generation. It also impacts whether they are someone who is or who has grown up in the country versus the city. That's another aspect, because those who've grown up in the country, sometimes they tend to have more to do with the generation above them than what we say. And that's because in the country, things do tend to be a bit more conservative. There is a slower pace. And so they're not as caught up as those in the cities because of just the pace of life in the city in comparison.
Okay, we've got another question, probably will be our last one for today's session, Joe. So from Josh Ebden, what tools do you suggest to manage the younger generation and some older regarding, i.e., the use of social media during work hours? The younger generation use social media as texting communication platform to update each other for items like where they are, what they're eating, essentially live updates, which results in loss of productivity within the workplace.
Yeah. I'll do my best to answer that one. From my perspective, if and this is and it's difficult to police this. I'll just be honest with it. If they're actually if they're using it to communicate about work, and so if they're sending messages um, like on Instagram to each other to communicate that things that have to do with work, that's not so much of an issue, which I think you'd agree on. But it's how do you police that? I don't know the best way to police it. To say that they can't use it while they're on the clock hours unless it's during a break, it can be a bit difficult. I don't have a specific answer for that because yeah, this is an issue. On one side, they use it social media. If they're using the instant messaging aspect, they use it both for business and pleasure. And I guess that's the difficult thing with just outlawing it completely. I guess I guess having a meeting with them and talking about how you can see that there's benefits when it comes to communication with when it comes to work, but just let them know, hey, if that's what you're doing, great, but a lot of you are not doing that. I guess having open and honest communications on it, and letting them know that you can see why they use it. You can see that there are some aspects that are helpful for the job, but there are some aspects that aren't. And just let them know it's hard for you because you need them to just focus on the job, and just let them know that this is an issue for you. You're trying to accommodate them and help them to understand, but they need to do their part in making sure they are actually using it for work. I hope that is helpful. It's a two-edged sword. That's a difficulty with social media.
Thank you, Joe. So we haven't been able to get to all of the questions that have come into the Q&A today because we have reached time. So I want to thank you very much, Joe, for your time and for sharing your expertise on this topic. So while we didn't get to all of the questions, Joe has kindly offered to review the ones that we haven't got to today and
Yep.
respond to those. Feel free to reach out to Joe via email or LinkedIn if you want to delve into anything more deeply or engage in his service. I hope you found this session valuable. I know I did, and that you'll be able to apply these strategies in your own teams and organizations. For those that didn't make it, the recording is available to all participants, and we encourage you to share it with your colleagues. So on behalf of the Australian Institute of Project Management and the Next Gen Project Professionals and Joe, thank you all for joining us, and we hope you have a great day.
Thank you all so much.
Thanks, Joe.